After everything I sacrificed for you, this is what you have to say?
You're a good woman, Nadia. But good isn't enough anymore.
Please don't leave me.
What would you do if the man you sacrificed everything for looked you in the eye, in front of your friends, in a crowded restaurant, and told you that you were no longer enough? That was the night I became a different woman. I remember every detail. The smell of jollof rice and fried plantain floating from the kitchen, the loud laughter from the table beside us, the feel of my lace dress against my skin, the one I had saved 3 weeks to buy because Jason mentioned he liked me in yellow. I had done everything right that evening. Hair laid, lips glossed, heart open. Jason sat across from me, but his eyes were somewhere else. They kept drifting to his phone, to the entrance, to anywhere that was not my face. I reached across the table and touched his hand. He pulled it back. "Nadia," he said, and the way he said my name, flat, hollow, like he was reading it off a receipt, I felt my chest tighten before he even continued. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, adjusting his collar like the conversation was making him hot. "We're in different places now, Nadia. You're still, the same, and I've grown." I stared at him. "Grown?" "I mean, I'm in a different space now, Nadia. My life has changed. The people I'm around, the things I want, even the kind of woman I want beside me. It's not personal." "Not personal." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Jason, I paid your rent for 8 months when your business was failing. I lied to my mother and told her you were doing well because I didn't want her to think less of you. I skipped my cousin's wedding because you needed me at a pitch meeting that went nowhere. And you're sitting here telling me it's not personal?" He didn't flinch. That was the part that broke me the most. He just sat there, calm, like he had rehearsed this conversation 100 times and was finally delivering it, like a bill he was finally settling. "You're a good woman," he said, "but good isn't always enough." A woman at the next table glanced over. She had heard. I saw the pity in her eyes, and I hated it. I hated him for giving me that pity. I hated myself for the tears that suddenly burned at the corners of my eyes because I had promised myself. I had promised myself I would never cry for a man in public. I stood up. I picked up my bag slowly, deliberately. I made sure my back was straight and my chin was up. "Enjoy your growth, Jason," I said, and I walked out. But I want to tell you what happened on the inside, because that is the part they never show you. On the inside, I was screaming. On the inside, every step toward that door felt like walking on broken glass. I got into my car, and I sat there for 45 minutes before I could drive. I cried until my throat hurt. I cried until my eyes swelled. I cried the kind of cry that has no sound, the kind that shakes your whole body in silence. Because it wasn't just Jason I was grieving. It was the version of myself that had loved him so fully, so completely, that she had forgotten to leave anything for herself. That night, I made 2 promises. One to him, though he would never hear it, "You will remember my name." And one to myself, "Never again." Her name was Bianca. I found out 3 weeks later, not from Jason because Jason had already blocked me on everything before I even got home that night. I found out from Sonia, my closest friend, who called me on a Saturday morning with the kind of voice people use when they're delivering bad news and they know it. "Nadia, I need to tell you something and I need you to sit down first." I was already sitting. I was sitting in my small apartment, surrounded by fabric samples and unfinished designs, trying to pour myself into work because work was the only thing not actively hurting me. "Just say it, Sonia." He posted her on his Instagram. He tagged her and everything. They were at the rooftop lounge. The rooftop lounge. The same place he had told me was too expensive for now when I suggested it for my birthday last year. Bianca was everything Jason apparently wanted me to be. Light-skinned, long weave, designer bag on every photo. Her Instagram page was the kind that made you feel poor just by scrolling. She wore clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. She posted in places I had only seen in magazines. She was, in the language of Lagos men who had suddenly come into money, a correct babe. I looked at her pictures for exactly 7 minutes. I know because I checked the time before and after. Then I put my phone face down on the table, picked up my needle and went back to work. But I won't lie to you. Those 7 minutes destroyed me a little. Not because Bianca was more beautiful. Beauty is not a competition, and I had enough sense to know that. What destroyed me was the thought that had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Was I not enough? Was I never enough? I called my mother that evening, not to tell her what happened. I could not bear that conversation yet, but just to hear her voice. She talked for 20 minutes about a neighbor's son who had just returned from abroad, and I sat on my kitchen floor and listened and let her voice hold me together. My friend Efe came over that weekend. She brought pepper soup and a bottle of Malta, and she sat beside me on my small couch and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the restaurant, about the 5 words, about Bianca's Instagram, about the rooftop lounge. Efe listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nadia, he did you a favor." I almost laughed. What kind of favor is that? "The kind that hurts first and makes sense later," she said. "A man who leaves you when you've been nothing but loyal is showing you exactly who he is. The question is, who are you going to show him you are?" I did not have an answer that day, but that question sat with me. It sat with me when I woke up at 3 in the morning with a hollow chest. It sat with me when I saw Jason's post and felt the twist of something ugly and hot in my stomach. It sat with me when Bianca appeared in a photo on his arm at an event, smiling that wide, practiced smile, and Jason was looking at her the way he had never once looked at me. Who are you going to show him you are? I did not know yet, but I was beginning to understand that the answer was entirely in my own hands. The first month after Jason left, I was barely functional. I won't pretend otherwise. I woke up tired. I went to sleep tired. I would sit in front of my sewing machine and stare at the fabric for an hour without touching it. My appetite was gone. My motivation was somewhere on the floor of that restaurant, somewhere beneath the table where Jason had sat and told me good wasn't enough. But I kept going, not because I was strong. I was not strong. I kept going because I had rent to pay, and a younger brother in school, and a mother who had worked too hard for me to fall apart. So I walked. My fashion business, Nadia Couture, which I had started 2 years earlier from a single second-hand sewing machine in my one-room apartment, became my lifeline. I poured everything I had left into it: the heartbreak, the anger, the humiliation, the grief. I stitched it all into fabric. I stayed up until midnight cutting patterns. I researched online. I watched tutorials. I saved money I did not have and bought better equipment. Slowly, very slowly, things began to shift. A woman named Flora, who worked at a law firm on the island, found me through Instagram and commissioned an outfit for her company dinner. She wore it and her colleagues asked who made it. 3 of them contacted me that same week. Then, Flora told her sister Lara, who was planning a traditional wedding. Lara told her friends, and suddenly, not overnight, not in a magical moment, but over months of grinding and grinding and grinding, I started to become something. I moved out of my one room and into a proper apartment, small, but mine. I hired my first assistant, a girl named Favor who was 20 years old and could sew faster than anyone I had ever seen. I opened a proper Instagram page with professional photos. I rebranded. I raised my prices. And when I raised my prices, the kind of client I attracted changed. Sonia dragged me to a networking event in October. I didn't want to go. I complained the entire drive there. And that night, I met a woman named Clara who ran a luxury boutique on Victoria Island. Clara liked my work. We talked for an hour. By the end of the year, Nadia Couture had a placement deal with Clara's boutique. I also started therapy. My friend Efe had been gently pushing me toward it for months, and I finally went. I sat in a small, quiet office in Ikoyi and told a calm woman named Dr. Ruth everything. Jason, the restaurant, the years of giving and giving and giving, the way I had slowly made myself smaller to make him comfortable. Dr. Ruth listened. Then she asked me a question I did not expect. Nadia, when did you last do something purely because it made you happy? Not for work, not for someone else, just for you. I couldn't answer. I sat there and I could not think of a single recent thing. That was when I understood what Jason had actually taken from me. Not just a relationship. He had taken the habit of choosing myself, and I needed to get that back. So I started small. I joined a dance class on Saturday mornings, something I had always wanted to do and always postponed. I started cooking proper meals instead of eating crackers over my sewing table. I bought myself flowers one Friday, just because I passed a roadside vendor and the yellow sunflowers reminded me that I liked yellow, and that had nothing to do with Jason. I was healing, not in a straight line, not without bad days, but I was healing. And I did not know it yet, but Jason was beginning to fall apart. If you've been following Nadia's story this far, and I think you know exactly why you can't stop, this is Reina Tales. Subscribe and don't miss how this ends. Jason's downfall did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a slow leak, the kind you don't notice until the ceiling is already stained. It started with the business. He had left his salaried job about a year after meeting Bianca, convinced by her circle of friends that he was too talented to work for someone else. He joined a real estate venture with two men he had met at one of those rooftop events, men who wore the right shoes and spoke the right language and made everything sound inevitable. Sonia told me about it gradually, in pieces, because Sonia still had mutual friends in that world. She was careful about how she shared information. She never said it with glee, never made it feel like gossip. She simply kept me informed the way a good friend does, because she knew the situation involved a man who had once been a central part of my life. The real estate deal collapsed. One of the partners disappeared with a significant portion of the capital. The other one had apparently not done the due diligence he claimed to have done. Jason lost almost everything he had put in. And then Bianca showed him who she was. It didn't happen immediately. There was a period of reassurance. She was still posting pictures with him, still tagging him, still performing the relationship publicly. But behind the photos, according to what Sonia heard, the conversations were different. Bianca had expensive taste and no apology for it. She had been accustomed to a certain kind of lifestyle, and a man going through financial difficulty was not the lifestyle she had signed up for. She started showing up less, responding slower. Her energy changed in that quiet, deliberate way women change their energy when they are already emotionally leaving but haven't announced it yet. Then, she was photographed at an event with another man, a businessman, older, obviously wealthy. She was wearing a new necklace that Jason certainly hadn't bought. She did not even call Jason to explain. She simply posted the photos and let them do the talking. I felt many things when Sonia told me this. I want to be honest about that. Part of me felt something vindictive and hot, the human, ugly part that wanted to say, see? The part that had sat on that restaurant chair and been told good wasn't enough, and now wanted the universe to confirm that it was, in fact, more than enough. But beneath that, what I mostly felt was tired. Tired for Jason even. Not sympathy, no, it was not sympathy. More like the distant, quiet recognition of watching someone walk into a fire you tried to warn them about. Because I had never hated Jason, that was the complicated truth. I had been devastated by him. I had been humiliated by him. But hate requires a kind of active energy I simply did not have for him anymore. He had made his choices, and now he was sitting inside the consequences. He tried calling me. The first time was a Saturday afternoon while I was in the middle of a fitting with a client. I saw his name on my screen and felt a flutter of something I refused to name. I let it ring out. He called again 2 days later. I declined it. He sent a message on a Thursday evening. "Nadia, I know I don't deserve this, but can we just talk?" I read it. I set my phone down. I finished the dress I was working on. I made myself a cup of tea. And then I wrote back, after a very long time, one sentence. "I'm not in a place where talking would serve either of us, Jason. Take care of yourself." I sent it. Then I blocked him. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely in control. 8 months later, on a quiet Tuesday evening in April, someone knocked on my door. I was not expecting anyone. Favor had already gone home. I was in my apartment in a simple house dress, eating rice and stew and watching a show I had been too busy to finish for 3 weeks. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. I opened the door. Jason stood there with yellow sunflowers in his hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at him the way you look at something you once knew well, but have since rearranged yourself around. He looked smaller. Not physically, he was still the same height, same face, but there was something diminished about him, something that had been burnt off. The polish he had acquired in those years of elite circles was gone. In its place was a man who looked like he had not been sleeping well. "Hi," he said. "Jason." "I know," he exhaled. "I know I have no right to be here. I know you don't owe me anything. I've been standing outside for 10 minutes trying to decide if I should knock." He glanced at the flowers, as if suddenly embarrassed by them. "These are stupid, aren't they?" "A little," I said. Something crossed his face, almost a smile, but sadder than a smile. "Nadia, I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that wants something back. I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to you, for how I treated you, for leaving the way I did." I leaned against the door frame and looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man who held my hand in the early years when we were both struggling, when his account was empty and mine was nearly so, and we used to laugh about our poverty like it was a shared joke only we understood. This was also the man who sat across a restaurant table and told me good wasn't enough. Both of those men were the same man. "Jason," I said, quietly, "I believe you are sorry. I genuinely do." His face lifted slightly. "But sorry doesn't rebuild what you broke. Not because I'm punishing you, but because I'm not the same woman you left. That woman, the one who rearranged her whole life around yours, who swallowed her own needs to protect yours, who convinced herself that loving you was enough reason to disappear, she doesn't live here anymore." He was quiet. His jaw moved slightly, like he was working to hold something in. "I've built something that belongs entirely to me, and I protect it. That means protecting myself too." He's not asking you to forget. I know he's not. But Jason, listen to what I'm telling you. What we had is done. Not out of bitterness, out of honesty. I deserve something that doesn't start with me having to forgive 3 years of being made to feel like I wasn't pretty enough, successful enough, polished enough. I paused. You made me feel like I had to earn a place in my own relationship. I will never give any person that power over me again. He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet. I knew that about him. Seeing it now did something to me, but it did not change anything. "Can I ask you one thing?" he said. "Go ahead. Are you happy?" I thought about the question. I thought about the dance class on Saturday mornings, about Flora and Lara and Clara, about Favor's laugh in the workshop, about the apartment that was entirely mine, about the woman in the mirror who had learned, slowly and painfully, to meet her own eyes. "Yes," I said, "I really am." He nodded again. He looked at the sunflowers in his hand. Then he looked up at me one last time, and what I saw in his face was not anger, not argument, just the full, quiet weight of understanding something too late. "Take care of yourself, Nadia. You too, Jason." I closed the door. I stood with my back against it for a moment in the silence of my apartment. My rice was going cold. My show was still playing. Outside, through the window, I could hear the sound of Lagos, motorbikes, distant music, someone calling out to someone. Life, ordinary and loud and continuing. I walked back to my couch. I picked up my food. I pressed play. And I smiled. Not the kind of smile you perform for anyone. The kind that rises from somewhere deep in your chest, quiet and sure, that nobody taught you and nobody can take away. Let me tell you something nobody tells you about moving on. They make it look like a switch, like one day you wake up fully healed, fully whole, standing in a beam of light while your hair blows in the wind. They don't tell you about the Tuesday afternoons when an old song comes on and your chest does something strange. They don't tell you about the moments when you see a couple laughing and something in you aches. Not for him specifically, but for the idea of being seen, being chosen, being loved without conditions. I had those moments, many of them. But here is what I also had. A life that was entirely and unapologetically mine. Nadia Couture grew beyond anything I had imagined. By the following year, I had a proper studio space in Lekki, not a big place, but mine, with my name on the door. Favor had been joined by 2 other girls. Clara's boutique carried a full seasonal line of my work. I had been featured in 2 online publications and 1 print magazine. I was invited to speak at a young women's entrepreneurship event in Abuja, and I sat on that stage and looked at the faces of young women who were listening, and I thought about the girl who had cried silently in a car outside a restaurant, and I felt the full, strained distance between who I had been and who I had become. My mother cried when I told her everything, not the sad cry, the proud one. She said, "Nadia, I always knew." Mothers say that, but this time I believed her. Efe and Sonia threw me a small dinner for my business anniversary. Efe made a speech that she clearly rehearsed but pretended was off the top of her head. Sonia bought me a frame that said she built what she was waiting for, which is now on the wall above my studio work table. And Jason? I heard through Sonia some months later that he had restructured his life, left the island circles, gone back to a steady job, was rebuilding quietly, privately. I did not follow up on this information. I did not need it. It did not belong to my story anymore. What I want to tell you, what I most want you to carry with you from Nadia's story is this. The man who leaves you because you are not enough will always underestimate how much you are capable of becoming. He cannot see your future because he was never equipped to. And that is not your loss. That is his. Every woman who has been compared and found lacking by someone who loved her conditionally deserves to know this. The comparing was never about your worth. It was about his limitations. A man secure in who he is does not need to diminish the woman beside him to feel taller. Nadia stood by Jason through every struggle. She fed his dreams when her own were hungry. She poured herself out like water into soil that took everything and gave nothing back. And when he poured her out, she gathered herself, drop by drop, stitch by stitch, day by day, until she was full again, until she was more than full. The same man who walked out of that restaurant, leaving her standing in her yellow dress, he came back. He came back with sunflowers and apology and genuine regret. And Nadia, who had once been so afraid of losing him that she had almost lost herself, looked at him from the doorway of a life she had built entirely with her own hands. And she chose herself. That is the ending. Not a man's return, not a revenge, just a woman standing in her own light, choosing herself completely that nothing and no one could dim it. And if you are reading this or listening to this, and you are standing in the middle of your own version of that restaurant, someone across from you making you feel like you are not enough, I want you to hear Nadia's voice. Get up, walk out, build. Not because they deserve to be left, but because you deserve to be found. First by yourself, and then, if you choose, by someone worthy of what you find there. This story was brought to you by Raina Tales. If this story moved you, if Nadia's story felt like someone opened a window and spoke directly into your life, subscribe to Raina Tales. Share this with the woman who needs to hear it today. And leave a comment below. What would you have said at that door? Because some doors, when you close them, become the beginning of everything.